Thanks for joining us at 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. 9 News hosted an historic 6 debates on its airwaves, ranging from the Senate race, the Treasurer's race, congressional races as well. For more on those debates, I spoke with one of the moderators, Kyle Clark, for more insight on how those debates went, who he expects to win in some of those races, as well as who those debates benefited the most. Here's my interview with Kyle. So here with Kyle Clark. Kyle, I want to start off with just your overall, before we kind of get into some of the specific debates, what was your overall top-line takeaway from them?
My takeaway was that candidates in Colorado still debate. Look at what's happening in other states where you've got candidates run away from debates like scared little children. You've got the Democratic gubernatorial candidate down in Arizona who will not debate her Republican opponent. You've got Republicans in some other states afraid to debate their Democratic opponents. And here in Colorado, 13 out of 14 candidates invited to debate were perfectly willing to. And we had a really robust series of respectful debates where voters got to see the candidates talk about where their views differ. And they also got to see what happened when these candidates get challenged a little bit, because they're all running for challenging jobs. So the idea that the way that you get a challenging job is just by saying in safe spaces doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. You want to see how they operate under a tiny little bit of pressure, maybe a studio light and a microphone and a question, that kind of thing. Because if they can't take that kind of pressure, how in the world are they going to be a senator or a governor or a member of Congress?
Fair point. And when it comes to that, coming to specific challenges, which of those 6 debates that you ended up moderating did you find to be the most contentious of the 6?
I thought that probably the Senate race was the most contentious.
Joe, after that your assertion that I've only passed one bill in the time that I've been in the Senate, you've said it over and over again. It's been fact-checked as false over and over again.
It's not false.
You're running a TV ad
it's not false.
saying it over and over again.
You passed one standalone bill.
Let him ask the question.
Why do you keep? Tell me what that means to you.
Well, it just goes to your effectiveness. You're
no, but
ineffective.
you're
ineffective.
Let's hear an answer.
I gave you the answer. You're ineffective.
Okay,
look,
you're a liar,
we've lost
Joe. You're a liar, Joe.
Yeah.
You're a liar, Joe.
That's not true.
You're lying
I'm
about
telling
my
the
record.
truth.
That was an hour-long commercial-free debate. It was the last one in our series, Republican Joe O'Dea and Democratic incumbent Michael Bennet. I think that there was a lot riding on that debate. It was their only televised debate in their race. It was televised statewide. And I think that O'Dea, especially, knowing that he's trailing, he acknowledges that he's trailing, needed to do something to disrupt what was going on in the race. And he was very aggressive. And I think what you saw from Michael Bennet is about the most animated we've seen him in the last 13 years that he's been in office. I think some of that is he's fed up with the way things work in Washington. I think he was particularly bothered by some of O'Dea's attacks that he felt were dishonest. I mean, he straight up called him a liar in the debate. And I also think that Bennet realizes that he's facing a legitimate challenger this time, which he didn't really have 6 years ago in Darrell Glenn. I mean, the dude ran one ad and it was him doing Bowflex, and I think Bennet realizes that he has a more formidable opponent this time around.
And when it came to the pushback, especially with the lying, where Bennet called O'Dea a liar, I think it specifically came down to that claim that in, 13 years in the Senate that Michael Bennet has only passed one bill, but that is pretty blatantly dishonest, isn't it?
It's definitely misleading, and we tried to fact check it in real time a couple of times in the debate. I think I fact checked it live twice, but O'Dea said it about 12 times. What it comes down to is there's lots of different ways to measure how bills kind of go through the process. And typically, most legislation in Congress gets rolled into larger pieces of legislation. They get attached to each other. It's like, well, if you give me this, then I'll give you that, and let's put them together, we'll pass them together, that kind of thing. If you only look at the standalone bills that get brought up as a singular bill, then get passed as a singular bill, of which Michael Bennet was the prime sponsor, like the originating sponsor. He has one of those in 13 years. I think it might have been the paper in Durango or Pagosa Springs that pointed out this past week that Joe O'Dea constantly talks about how effective Joe Manchin is, Democrat from West Virginia. By that same measure, Joe Manchin also has one bill. It's not a commonly used measure of how effective senators are, because most of the time it's how many of the big deals are you involved in that have a lot of pieces of legislation put together. Bennet takes umbrage at the idea of he's only passed one thing because he points to, well, I've written 100 bills. I've been involved in all of these others. But man, O'Dea knew he was under his skin, so he kept repeating this misleading claim. And despite us fact-checking it, he didn't really care. He was going with it.
He was going with it. But you also said at the beginning that O'Dea knew he was trailing, that he needed to do something in order to perhaps make up some ground. Do you think he did enough in that debate?
I don't know if he did enough. He did something. I mean, he had Bennett on the defensive for almost the entire night. I mean, he controlled the conversation in a very aggressive way, turning questions back at Bennett, making the race about Bennett's record. Bennett tried to make it about O'Day a bit and his past support for Donald Trump, his promised future support of Donald Trump. But that's a tougher thing to do because Joe O'Day doesn't have a record. He's just a guy. And I think if there's anything we take out of this race, if Joe O'Day wins or overperforms where Republicans have previously, there's your template going forward for Colorado Republicans. Grab a dude with no record whatsoever, or a woman with no record whatsoever, have them go out and say, here are the things that I believe, and there's no real way to double check it because these are the things that I believe. And maybe that could be a path forward for Colorado Republicans who are trying to get off the map. They're at the most powerless point since before World War II. They see O'Day as potentially their most winnable race this year. And I think it's a real test of this idea of what if we just get a blank slate, put a blank slate in front of people with no record and see how it works.
Of course, we're going to have a pretty good litmus test of this coming up with Heidi Ganahl, who I think it's safe to say has run a campaign further to the right than Joe O'Day. So the results from that, and of course, also want to note for our viewers out there that Heidi Ganahl did not agree to the terms of a 9 News debate. We did intend to have her debate, did not agree to that, so there was no gubernatorial debate. That said, moving on to one of the House races, and one that you kind of briefly mentioned at the beginning, between Caraveo and Kirkmeyer in the newly created 8th Congressional District. Also a debate which you were telling me before we got on camera here, that they hadn't really met each other before, despite the fact that they've served in the legislature together. It
blew me away. They sit down for the debate. We're getting the camera situated and everything else. I said, hey, when was the last time you two were together? Thinking maybe it was like at a forum the week before or something like that, as they go around and they do events. Oh, I don't think that we've met before. And Barb Kirkmeyer, Republican, says to Democrat Yadira Caraveo, well, we might have met once in an elevator at the legislature when we both served there. Different parties, different chambers, but they had no common recollection of meeting one another, despite the fact that they had been running against one another for months. And I think it indicates what's going on in Colorado's new 8th Congressional District, stretching from the northern suburbs of Denver, so Adams County, up through Greeley, is you have some very fiercely partisan Republicans, very fiercely partisan Democrats, and both sides have kind of been talking to their respective corners and haven't necessarily been doing a lot of joint events, joint forums. Now, they've done some since their only televised debate, which was with us. But I think that's the first debate that I've ever moderated here at 9 News or anywhere else where the candidates met at the debate. I'll tell you why that matters. Debating is weird. Sitting across the table or next to somebody and talking about where you disagree in front of TV cameras, that's a weird thing. It's not what people normally do every day. It's super weird if you have no working relationship with the person. And it results in nervousness and awkwardness and that kind of thing, where you don't see that with the candidates who disagree strongly but do know each other and even have good working relationship. Think like in the AG's race, Democratic AG Phil Weiser and Republican John Kellner. Those two guys disagree on a bunch. They respect each other, they're polite to each other, and they've been around each other a ton. So they sit down together, they're talking, whatever else, and then they have an exchange about their differences. Caraveo and Kirkmeyer, it was like grabbing two random strangers off the street who disagree politically and putting them in an elevator together. I mean, it was just an awkward experience, I think, for them and maybe even for the people at home.
Do you think that translated on camera?
I think so. I think you can see it. I think they're somewhat tentative around each other.
Who do you think that potentially benefits in a 50-50 dead heat race?
I think it benefits Kirkmeyer because she's a more experienced politician. She's been in the game longer. She's done this stuff before. She's done debates before, and she clearly was more comfortable in that format. And that is Colorado's closest congressional race, despite Democrats' wishes and hopes that it might be Lauren Boebert's district. It's the 8th. That's the one that's close. Although I think the polling certainly suggests, as does the actions of the campaigns right now, that Kirkmeyer is leading and Caraveo is trailing. Because the campaign that's touting that it's close is the campaign that's behind. And the Caraveo campaign is saying, no, it's close, which means they're a little behind. But that's a race that Democrats think is eminently winnable, but it's going to be tough.
Well, speaking of interesting dynamics, maybe in a race where the Democrat may have the leg up, in the 7th Congressional District, Brittany Pedersen, established politician, taking on Eric Odlin, a bit more of an upstart. That debate seemed to focus in large part on some of the claims by Eric Adlon, who said that the 2020 election at one point, I think he said this in June, was, quote, absolutely rigged. How do you think that shaped that debate?
Well, there's a race where you have two people with very stark ideological differences. Brittany Pedersen is a progressive. She is been in the political mix for a long time. She was handpicked by the Democrats to run in this race. They cleared the primary for her after Ed Perlmutter retired. So she was kind of the anointed chosen one in that race, very experienced politically and very progressive. And then you've got Eric Adlon, who kind of comes out of the MAGA wing of Republicans and has no political experience. And one of the questions that we asked him was about this business about the election being rigged, because he doesn't talk about that anymore. He did talk about that in front of Republican crowds during the primary, but he doesn't say that anymore. And that's what he said to me, which is, well, my view has become nuanced about that, and you've got to be careful what you say. And what I was unable to establish through my own lack of skill in the debate was, has he changed his mind about whether the election was rigged, or does he just understand that that is how you drop an atom bomb on your campaign when you're in a democratically leaning district? And I couldn't get a straight answer out of him about whether he still believes that the election was absolutely rigged, or if he's just understood he can't say that aloud no more.
Did Trump lose the 2020 election? Yes or no?
Yes, he lost the 2020 election. Biden is the president. I mean, we have out of control inflation, rising crime, an unsecure border, unprecedented global instability. Biden's clearly the president.
Do you think it was a hint that he said he said straight up, yes, he would accept the election results either way? I mean, does that maybe make it pretty clear that he was just doing that to appease maybe Republican primary voters?
I think when you kind of sort people into the categories of election deniers, there's the hardcore, I truly believe the elections are rigged. There's Chinese ballots made of bamboo coming in from overseas. Dominion has rigged the election. That's a pretty thin strata of Colorado politics. That's your Tina Peters, your Joel Oltmann, those folks. Then you've got all of the folks who basically believe it, but aren't like true blue or true red believers where they can cite it chapter and verse about why the elections are rigged. They've just heard it a lot, so they repeat it. And then below that, you've got another strata, which is people who know that it is to their advantage to flirt with that stuff, to kind of wink, wink, nod, nod at it. That's what gubernatorial candidate Heidi Ganahl has done throughout her race. She won't come out and straight up say the election's rigged, but she picks an election denier as her running mate. She wink, wink, nods, nods at crowds about how you won't hear me talk about this because it's not how you win, but I'm with you on that stuff. It's that kind of thing. I would say Adlon is somewhere between the second and third strata. I don't believe that Eric Adlon has a fully formed thesis about how China or Antifa or Dominion is supposedly rigging elections. I do think he knows the words to the song, and he's gone past the I just want to flirt and nudge at this stuff, because he has told crowds he thought the election was rigged. That was a long explanation. But I think that there's different levels of election denialism, and I don't think that it's fair to just say, well, all Republicans are in this boat. No. Some people are captains of the boat, some people are paddling the boat, and some people are sitting on the boat.
Pedersen, the clear favorite, I think it's safe to say,
sure,
in that race. But we've seen the Democrats in some trouble in some plus 10-ish Biden districts like the 7th Congressional. Do you think that Adlon has a chance in that race?
I think that Republicans don't think he has a chance, which was probably the more important measure right now. That was kind of a dream district for Republicans, that if a huge red wave showed up this year, and enough of a red wave that it could reach the Rockies, because we've seen red waves before that don't reach Colorado, that was a winnable district for Republicans. I don't know if he's the guy who could win it. The whole MAGA election rigged, line is my logo, that kind of thing. He might not be the kind of guy who could win in that district, whereas another candidate might have had a better chance. But you got to remember, at the beginning of this election season, that was very much a district that Republicans said, this baby's in play now, because Perlmutter's district got reconfigured, and you've got Ed Perlmutter out of there. Similar to when Republican Mike Kaufman left Colorado's 6th Congressional District, you went from a race that Mike Kaufman held that district Republican for probably 3 cycles beyond when it would have flipped with anybody else, just through his sheer force of will and hard work and his ability to connect with people. You'll notice that district flips to Jason Crow. Democrat Jason Crow beats Mike Kaufman. Nobody's even talking about that district being competitive anymore. A lot of that was Kaufman's district. This was Ed Perlmutter's district. Now, the bounds have changed, but with him out of there, Republicans were very hopeful about what they could do I haven't talked to any Republicans that think that they legitimately could pick it up this year.
All right, so it sounds like that the debate didn't move the needle in that direction in the 7th. Over to the Secretary of State race, a fairly contentious one. Also a lot of airwaves being filled up by the race between Jenna Griswold and Pam Anderson. How did you think that debate came to play?
Well, there's another race where Pam Anderson, the Republican, they would acknowledge they're down to Jenna Griswold, who is an incredible fundraiser, very prolific. She's constantly on MSNBC. She was on MSNBC 5 minutes before we were talking right here. Constantly on MSNBC, has a huge national profile, uses it to raise a ton of money. So she's buried Pam Anderson in an avalanche of ads. And she has a growing reputation in the Colorado Democratic Party. So Pam Anderson knows she's behind in that race, had to take it to Pam Anderson. How effectively did she do that in that debate? Viewers can decide for themselves. She was trying to put Griswold on the defensive for a number of missteps in her office and that kind of thing. We should also note, if people are watching that debate, there's a reason why it's in a different studio than our debates in the round, and it was because Griswold, while COVID negative, had a bit of a cough and a cold, so we were trying to space everybody out a little bit more so that nobody got sick before Election Day. And
she did have a cough, I think, a noticeable cough during the debate, right?
It was especially pronounced anytime her opponent was making a point.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah.
Attorney General's race, Phil Weiser and John Kellner, you mentioned that there's a mutual respect for each other. Who do you think came out on top in that debate?
You know, that's a good question, and I haven't heard many people posit, even partisans posit, that one man really got the better of the other in that debate. That was probably our most polished debate in the sense that both of those guys are attorneys. They know how to make their case in front of whether it's a classroom or a courtroom or whatever else. And they also know how not to get out over their skis with an argument, which is where a lot of candidates will get in trouble in a debate. They'll get excited, they'll get going, and they'll take something from the realm of true to the realm of untrue, overstated, hyperbole, and then that's where they'll get knocked. Those guys are careful. Weiser and Kellner are careful, and they're intelligent, and they made their respective cases where they disagree on a lot of issues, including the role of the Attorney General in addressing crime, the fact that Weiser wasn't involved in the fentanyl debate in 2019, and he was this time around, and whether Kellner's fairly conservative social views on issues like opposition to abortion, his NRA endorsement, things like that, whether that matters in the race for AG. Big disagreements, but very respectful, clear, and straightforward conversation about it.
So with that said, to whose advantage does maybe a draw in that instance play to? Is it Weiser?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's a lot of Republicans, and I think just because Kellner's a very impressive candidate, in the sense that he is polished and articulate and sticks to the issues and is disciplined in a way that in the governor's race, Heidi Ganahl certainly is not, and much more polished than Joe O'Dea is. Now, maybe Republicans don't want polish in the Senate race. They want, an everyday kind of vibe. But Kellner's a very impressive spokesperson for the Republican cause. If he doesn't win this race, they're going to run him again for something. Whether it's governor or Senate or something, they will run him again because he's that good. So I think there's a lot of Republicans who see that as a race where they might be in good shape if this turns out to be a Republican year. So I don't know if the debate really shifted the dynamics of that race at all. Both guys clearly put out, their viewpoints. That was a highly watched debate, I would say. We had 90,000 plus that watched that debate live on Next, which for some context, there was a gubernatorial debate that aired elsewhere in town, and it was more than double the number that watched the gubernatorial debate. So there's a lot of people who watched that AG's race. Whether it moves the needle, I don't really know.
I guess maybe one of my more optimistic takeaways from this is you mentioned at the start that people are debating, and you mentioned that's one of your big takeaways. You mentioned that there was high viewership for something a little lower down the ballot in terms of an attorney general's race. Is that a gleam of optimism in the, obviously difficult, polarized times that we're living in?
I mean, I think that it's a real credit to all of the candidates across the board that 13 out of 14 candidates, with the exception of Heidi Ganahl, were willing to come in and debate. And honestly, not even like, well, maybe let's talk about whatever. It was, yeah, sure, we'll come in. When do you want to do this? I mean, there was no pushback at all. Additionally, all 13 of those campaigns walked out of the debate without a negative thing to say about the experience. They felt like they got a fair shake. The debate was equally hard on everybody. They got a chance to present their views. So that's encouraging, and it puts forth kind of a marker that Colorado voters can expect their candidates to do all the various things involved in a campaign, including answering hard questions live on camera, having their opponent challenge them, going back and forth in a respectful way, and settling issues in real time, or hashing them out in real time. That's what voters can expect. I love that we're doing that in a time when in other states you've got Democrats and Republicans running away from debates.
Absolutely. I guess the final one, and I know maybe a little facetiously at times, there was the treasurer debate might not have gone. You were excited about it, but you were actually excited about it afterwards, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, so there you've got Republican Lang Sias and you've got Democratic incumbent Dave Young in that race. These two guys served in the legislature together years ago. There's a lot of mutual respect between the two of them. They were the only candidates who very vocally told us, we're friends. We're friends. We're just running against each other. We've got difference of opinion on that kind of thing. The wild thing is the treasurer's office, most people in Colorado probably can't even name what the treasurer's office does. The only reason that I know is because it's my job to know. If it wasn't my job, I'd have no idea. But the treasurer runs the state's pension funds and investments, or runs the investments, has a hand in the pension fund, PARA, does the unclaimed property division, and has kind of a say, almost like a ceremonial say or a bully pulpit in financial matters. So is it the flashiest thing in the world? No, but it's one of the state constitutional offices. They're elected statewide. Interestingly, Lang Sias, the Republican, did not have a ton of criticism of how Dave Young has run the office. He has no criticism of Dave Young, the man, but he's making the argument, don't you want some balance in your elected government? Shouldn't we put a Republican in somewhere? And hey, Republicans, good with money, right? Make me the treasurer. That's the gist of his argument. Like, he has no scathing criticism of Dave Young, nor does Dave Young have any scathing criticism of Lang Sias. I think I asked him at one point blank in the debate, like, what harm do you think this man would do as treasurer? And he's like, well, I don't think he'd really do any harm, but I think that we're doing a good job. So, but what you had is you did have a debate where these guys have some disagreements over financial conservatism versus the role of government spending, a real debate over Tabor tax refunds and what role they should play in state finances. But again, just a respectful conversation between two guys who like each other, have worked together in the future, and one of them's trying to take the other one's job.
Refreshing, I must say. Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot. So we were talking about you asking hard questions. I'm going to ask you one hard question here, which would be, if you had to pick one of those debates that potentially moved the needle the most, which would it be?
The debate that moved the needle the most. Yeah. It would be that. It would be the Senate race. It would be the Senate race. I think just because Coloradans are so familiar with Michael Bennet, kind of know what you're going to get with Michael Bennet. A lot of people still are not familiar with Joe O'Dea. Who's this guy? He's a construction company guy. What's going on? And he came to play. I mean, he had a mission, which was to keep Bennett on the defensive. He had about 3 talking points that he wanted to tie Bennett to Biden, say he votes with him 98% of the time, made that misleading claim about one bill or whatever else. But if you're a Republican or you're a conservative-leaning independent, you watch that and you're just like, well, dang, O'Dea came and took it to him, which was what O'Dea had to do. Does that move enough votes at the end of the day to change the complexion of the race? I don't know. Joe O'Dea needs to move more than a couple of votes in order to be competitive there. But I thought that O'Dea did the most he could with the opportunity he had.
Interesting. Well, Kyle, thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely. Pleasure.